Director of Admissions at Vermont Law School. Thank you so much for joining us today for our info session on our Master of Arts in Restorative Justice. I'm joined here by Professor Sand, and I'm joined here by Alana. Alana, will you please help me with your last name that I need a little phonetic help with? Ojibwe, who is, she holds the Restorative Justice Program. She's probably one of the most important people in the Restorative Justice Program. I'm also joined by our Assistant Director in Graduate Studies, and that's Veronica Schlurf. And then I'm joined by our newest member, who is a graduate of VLS. He did our Master's Environmental Law and Policy, and that is Nasser, who's joined us. So that's our Vermont Law. Oh, and then we have a student. I don't know if Kyla has been able to get in, but she's trying to get into the Zoom. So if Nasser, if you can see her, just make sure that we admit her. So welcome all of you today. The only thing I asked some housekeeping tips, if you just want to mute your microphone when everyone's speaking so we don't have any type of echo, anything along those lines. And I wanted to remind you that we are recording this session, so just a little plug in the recording arena. So our Center for Justice Reform, this is actually a wonderful center that Professor Sand's going to talk about. And restorative justice is a broad umbrella. It's a response, it's a new response to harm and conflict. And he'll go into it a little bit more. And the programs that we offer in our Center for Restorative Justice is our Master of Arts in Restorative Justice, our joint degree, which if you do a JD and a Master of Arts in Restorative Justice, and our professional certificate. And you can see the staff, you can see Alana and Professor Sand and Professor Clark and Tyler and Professor Pointer, is that right? Lindsay's last name? Okay, so it's a great team, and so I wanted to give them all a plug. And I don't know if you guys planned this, but you all have wonderful smiles. So I'm going to move on a little bit. Okay. Jumped the gun. Okay, so restorative justice, Professor Sam's going to go first. I know, I love this picture, and I knew you would have a little laugh about it. So engaging. I want to talk about how our professors are engaging. One, Professor Sand is here this evening. Two, do you see how I say Robert Sand, change agent? I just changed that today because you're the founding director of our Center for Justice Reform, a professor in law, and you've made change and you've affected so many lives locally and nationally. So Professor Sand, do you want to take it from here and just cue me when you want me to move forward on the slides?
Thanks, Katie. I'm thinking Robert Sand's secret agent would have that would have a very cool sound to it. And this photo, which it's a little disconcerting to be looking at a photo myself, is making me realize I probably need to get a haircut. Hi, everyone. And I can see some faces and I can see some names. So I'm assuming there are faces behind those names. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the questions that we ask. So I was a prosecutor for 22 years, 16 of them as the elected state's attorney or DA for Windsor County, Vermont. Windsor County is the largest geographical county in Vermont. It's about the 4th or 5th largest per capita. It includes South Royalton. My office filed about 2,000 criminal cases a year. When I would come back to my office following a jury trial, my staff would say to me, "Did you win?" And that was the exact same question that my parents and my siblings would ask me when I came home in high school following a baseball game, a soccer match, or when I wrestled. The criminal legal system isn't supposed to be a sport. When I would come back to my office after a sentencing hearing, my staff would ask me, "What did you get?" as if the consequences imposed on another human being and the duration of time that that human being was to be incarcerated, essentially locked into a cage, was somehow a prize for me as the prosecutor. Restorative justice asks fundamentally different questions. Who was harmed? What does that person want and need? Who is responsible for that harm? As a result of causing harm, what obligations does that person have to make amends? And how can the net outcome not be the further infliction of pain on someone to teach them they're not supposed to harm other people, but instead to strengthen individuals, to strengthen relationships, and ultimately to strengthen communities? So until we start asking the right questions, I don't think we're going to get the outcome that I suspect most people participating in this Zoom would like to see, which is safer communities, accountability and safer communities, and not simply punishment for punishment's sake. So it's pretty amazing that VLS recognized the value and importance, in addition to an incredible, more traditional legal education, that the school recognized the value of restorative justice. And so we remain the only law school in the country where a student can earn a JD and also earn a Master of Arts in restorative justice. The program started, the planning started in about 2017, 2018. Actually started earlier than that. Our first class came in 2018, and we now have a pretty wonderful array of courses developed by the Center for Justice Reform. And I think Katie will be able to share with all of us a schematic that shows, or a diagram that shows all of the courses that we have developed related to the restorative justice program in Vermont. And with any luck, we'll see this. Yeah, you may not be able to read that, but trust me, it's a pretty wonderful list of contemporary cutting edge courses. One of the other things that we've done that is really important is we are the host organization for the National Center on Restorative Justice, which is a federally funded collaboration between Vermont Law School, the University of Vermont, and the University of San Diego. Part of that project has been a very comprehensive review of the VLS RJ curriculum, seeking input from students, from graduates, and from our faculty. And that's remarkably an unusual process, to do a very deep self-reflection in what we are offering. And that process is going to serve as a springboard for even more courses for the MARJ and the Restorative Justice Program. The last thing that I will say is probably a month ago, I created a Google alert for restorative justice. And I don't know if you're familiar with Google alerts, but you will get a daily email assembled by Google that shows all the reported instances of the words you put in for the alert. So I put in a Google alert for restorative justice. It is extraordinary how many hits there are now across the country and across the globe. And so it's a pretty remarkable time, I believe, to enhance one's education in restorative justice. For people interested in the criminal justice system, education, not-for-profits, advocacy, RJ is really entering into mainstream discourse. And I'm quite convinced that from the standpoint of employability post-graduate school having an RJ degree is going to be really, really useful. And I'm sticking around and would love to answer questions when we get to Q&A. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you, Professor Sand. And it's very true in at the law school, even in our meetings in each of our departments, we are incorporating restorative justice practices. So everyday stuff, it's amazing to see. And I love that growth that I've seen over the past couple years. Alana, love to move to you. Thank you.
All right. Is it possible, Katie, to, let's see, can we end the screen share? Okay, awesome. I like seeing faces. I like that tree diagram a lot, but I also really like seeing your faces. So I work as the program manager and really work most directly with students in the program and our faculty and sort of internally at VLS, but I really love getting to work with students. And so a few things I just wanted to talk about related to the program is that there's just so much exciting flexibility with what you can do with this degree, and several ways to do the degree. So there is, as Katie mentioned in the beginning, there's a Master's of Restorative Justice, which is a 30 credit degree. There is a Certificate in Restorative Justice, which is 9 credit degree. And then there's the joint degree between the JD and the Master's. And the nice thing, there's flexibility with all of it. And we oftentimes have seen students do a combination where they might, for example, start in the certificate, do those 9 credits and feel like they want more. They want the full master's or they want to take additional classes. And that can easily transfer into the full master's. And similarly, we'll have students, you know, maybe start with the master's and as they're taking classes with JD students or some mix of both, really feel like they want to do the joint degree, and vice versa. We have JD students that take one of our restorative justice elective classes and then decide that they really feel like it would be useful to add that as a joint degree as well. And then for the master's specifically and the certificate, both of those are offered. You can do it residentially or online. And some students, again, do sort of a mix of the two. So you might mostly be an online student and then decide in the summertime you're interested in coming to Vermont for 2 weeks and come and take a class in person. You know, or vice versa. Our residential students might go away for the summer and then they can take an online class. So there is flexibility to kind of do a combination. And so I really love that aspect of working with students. There's really kind of limitless ways to meet your needs of scheduling and modality. So I really like that. And then the classes themselves, you could see in that image, but there's a really exciting growing variety of classes that stemmed from this sort of connection with the criminal justice system and have grown in a lot of really exciting ways to everything from how restorative justice is used in education settings, in nonprofits to address domestic and sexual violence, looking at a global restorative justice practices and applications. There's just a lot of different options of these classes. And then beyond that, students also have opportunities to do things like an externship or an independent research project. And so with the externships, we've had students working at the Attorney General's office. We've had students working at a women's facility, prison, and developing restorative justice curriculum. We've had students working at community justice centers locally here in Vermont and working on restorative justice panels and getting involved as a volunteer member in those programs. So there's a lot of really interesting options that students are doing within these degree programs. And it's been really exciting to see the growth in both for the residential group of students and then online. The online group of students, we have, you know, folks joining from all over the country, all different ages, all different professional backgrounds. And because of that, as Professor Sand had mentioned, we've been doing this sort of program evaluation to look at really pulling feedback from those who are most intensely involved with the program, both students and faculty, to say, if you're getting a master's in restorative justice, what do we collectively think that someone coming out of this degree should know and do and value? And that was sort of what guided this reshaping that is constantly trying to be responsive to what is happening in the field, what's relevant, where's their growth in the field, and what's the needs from students, where's the interest. So it's changing a lot. It's grown a lot. And yeah, it's been really exciting to be a part of that, and also happy to answer questions. But I also want to make time and space for, I can't see if Kyla has joined us back, but if she has, okay, great. So Kyla, I'm just going to make a quick plug. Kyla is phenomenal. Kyla did our residential MARJ program last year and is now a JD student. And she's just one of those students who has really been involved in so much at VLS and in the program and within the community. So I'm going to hand it off to her to talk more about her experience.
Yeah, thank you, Alana. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Yeah, as Alana was saying, I started with the master's program and then continued on to the JD. The reason why I kind of chose the master's in restorative justice was just because of how unique it was. It's not really every day that you read about a law school providing classes in restorative justice. But when I first started or was first expressing interest, I didn't really have any idea of what restorative justice was. But I actually ended up having a phone call with Professor Sand when I was considering some of the master's programs at VLS. And we spoke a lot about how restorative justice really emphasizes repairing relationships as opposed to punishing the individuals that cause harm. And I think about 30 seconds into that conversation, I was sold, and I knew restorative justice was an area of study that I wanted to pursue. And I'd always known that I wanted to do something within the legal system, but I was pretty hesitant because I didn't really support the adversarial process. But after learning about restorative justice, it gave me a new insight into what justice could look like, and you know, what a new way of doing things and achieving justice can also look like. And even if you don't want to go into the legal system, there's so many other opportunities that restorative justice fits into, just because of the skills you develop. One of those skills being, you know, conversation. They apply, they're so important nowadays. And one of those skills that I was able to develop and practice was that of motivational interviewing. And if you don't know what it is, there's a good chance you're probably already doing it. But it's just some skills and tactics that you can use to really guide the conversation, to help further one's goals or develop specific solutions to barriers. But the trick is you have to get the other person talking, and to get them to get to the answer. So it's really listening focused, as opposed to, you know, leading the conversation. One big highlight that I absolutely loved about the program was the opportunity to develop those same skills outside of the classroom as well. During my time in the master's program, there were RJ weekly chats that I tried to attend as often as possible. Unfortunately, with the JD, I've been pretty busy and I can't attend as often as possible, but you speak with past and current students just about restorative justice, and everyone's at a little bit different, at a different spot in their life. So you hear how they integrate restorative justice into, you know, what situations they're faced with, or you can also talk about restorative justice and current events. It was just a space, you know, to leave open, to talk about whatever you wanted, which I really appreciated because I learned best outside of the classroom. That also kind of takes me into my next point, what I'm currently doing with restorative justice, my master's degree. I've been volunteering a lot with the community justice centers here in Vermont, the ones that Alana was talking about earlier. where I help support individuals who are reintegrating back into the society who have been released from prison. And the program that I work in specifically is called COSAS, a Circle of Support and Accountability. There's a documentary by Bess O'Brien called Coming Home. I highly recommend it. I've watched it maybe 3 times, but it explains what COSAs are in such great detail. But essentially you speak one-on-one with an individual or within a group, and you use those conversation skills, right? You get them talking about barriers that they're facing, reintegrating, or any solutions that they are considering, and just any and everything that they want to talk about. Anything and everything that they want to talk about, excuse me. But it's just a great way to meet like members of the community. And it's really fulfilling work, which is one of the reasons why I keep coming back to it. And any advice I have, I highly recommend, entering into the master's program, I guess is a way you could say it. Even if you don't know a lot about restorative justice, I think you always hear about restorative justice.
Recording in progress.
Oh, sorry. Okay. You always hear about how restorative justice is not really new, but it's being newly discovered. And you're just, getting started in a process or a method that just brings the community together, as Professor Sand was saying, to help strengthen relationships and ultimately communities. Thank you.
Kyla's too humble to mention that her advocacy about the importance of motivational interviewing is why we are offering a course this summer on, wait for it, yes, motivational interviewing. So she's been a very effective advocate for the importance of that technique of interacting with people.
That's wonderful. I was wondering, Kyla, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. One of the things, it says, Coming Hope is amazing. I am currently in my month 7 with my current core member. Highly recommend volunteering at CJC's. Hope, yeah, home. Coming home is amazing. There we go. Sorry, I'm like reading it in there, but please ask questions. I know, Andrew, you may have some questions. My question, Kyla, to you is, what were your favorite courses that you took in the master program, and kind of what shifted?
Yeah, so I really like some of the introductory courses. Like I said, I didn't know what restorative justice was, so I focused on getting a really good foundation of what restorative justice is. And Professor Miller taught principles in restorative justice, and it goes over the history of restorative justice, where it started, and it was just really helpful to learn where restorative justice was and how it applies in today's day and age. And like I said, I further developed my understanding of restorative justice through those extracurricular chats. So I guess in addition to classes, the outside of classroom experience was also really helpful. And also Professor Sand, advanced criminal law course, you got to choose really any topic that you wanted and integrate restorative justice into that topic that you were focusing on. And it was just really nice to kind of build up like a whole process from the ground up. And because it really like helped your understanding, and to see like what are the interplays in including restorative justice into this specific field, or what are the potential drawbacks or criticisms of it.
Kyla, your check is in the mail, but Kyla did a very cool project where she designed a program of judicial education related to RJ. And this class was essentially via Zoom. But I still remember she had she cast herself in the role of a person running for judicial office. And so her initial presentation to the class was as a candidate for judicial office. And I definitely saw future political career based on that very compelling presentation.
Professor Sand, because this was your brainchild and it's a dream that you made happen, what are some like lofty goals that you would like hope to see one day in the criminal justice system?
Wow.
I know.
I mean, that's massive. So I'm going to slightly redirect the question to say, we don't often say this, but we're among friends. RJ is subversive. Giving everybody a voice is a radical concept. We live in a society and in a country where certain voices dominate and certain voices are sublimated if they're even heard at all. And it's a radical concept at a law school for everyone to have equal voice. And it's a radical concept in the criminal legal system. So I don't often say that part of the goal was to transform legal education, but that is part of the goal. I know from 2 decades in the system, we dehumanize, we emphasize otherness, we separate, we stigmatize, and we compound harm. So my goal ultimately is a justice system that makes us safer, that makes people stronger, that allows people, actually requires people to be accountable, not through the imposition of punishment, but through the obligations that arise for people who cause harm. Lots of folks think RJ is just a slap on the wrist, kumbaya. And I think that is a gross misperception. There are obligations that arise when people cause harm. RJ gives people the opportunity and the responsibility to make amends. And I think Alana's heard this before, but I've been obsessing a bit about the word responsibility or responsible party, because it really is, it means 2 opposite things. It means the person who caused harm, you're responsible for causing that harm. But it also is the person who has the obligation, who's responsible for making things right. The criminal legal system as it currently exists does not impose an obligation on people to make things right. RJ does that, which is why I think it's a more effective response, it's a less costly response, and it's a response that yields better outcomes, not just for the responsible party, but also for the harmed party. Relying on laws to decide what an outcome should be, instead of really listening to the individuals who have been harmed, divests them of their agency and their autonomy. So RJ really tries to give meaningful voice to people who have been harmed. I will also say, on a broader, more systemic level, some people will talk about restorative justice and transformative justice. I've always put them under the same umbrella, that harm, yes, can be of individual origin, but there are also multi-generational systemic factors that contribute to that. And this movement has an obligation to unearth those and figure out how to tackle them.
Thank you. A follow-up question. Does RJ provide a parameter for punishment, or is it just render punishment as unnecessary?
There are definitely people in the movement who are prison abolitionists. I'm not there. I believe that there is a very, very small subset of people who pose a present and ongoing risk of harm. And if there is no way to provide for public safety without removing those people, personally, I am all right with their being removed. I approach it from a slightly different perspective. Their obligation to make amends is to not cause further harm. And if the only way that we can safeguard against their causing further harm is through separation, I can accept that. But you get there through a very different thought process than we do right now. So there are some who say the ultimate goal, and I'm fine with the lofty goal of no more prisons, but I don't know that that ever becomes a reality, nor do I think it is essential to the movement for there to be complete prison abolition.
Can I add on to that really quick? First, Robbie, I'm so excited you were able to join. And this is such a good question because I think, it comes up a lot. And I think in a lot of sort of news and media, I think one common distinction that's really important about restorative justice is that the main difference that I think is so important is that it's not necessarily a conversation about in lieu of punishment or something that's either or. The biggest difference is who is at the center of deciding what happens. And, punishment as a term, I think, is different than accountability. And so if the person who was harmed is given the voice and agency to decide what repair is needed for the harm that happened, they may decide that they want that punishment. So, it's not necessarily in lieu of, but it's really about centering the voices of those who were most impacted by harms and making sure that they have a role in that process. Because, it's amazing in an awful way how completely dominated the justice system is in the offender harmed, responsible party, whatever language you give them. The person who caused the harm is really the centerpiece of the entire justice system. And those who are most harmed, victims, survivors, are really absent. And it becomes, a harm against this, the person and the state rather than the person who was most impacted. And that's true for schools. It's different language. So whether it's the justice system or not, I think, it's such a good question because it really just gets to the root of it's not necessarily about not being punished. It's about giving choice to the person who was harmed to say, what does accountability look like for this to be better? And that gives them the choice to say if punishment may feel necessary or what, to the extent of what. But oftentimes, a lot of it is that people want to feel like they have a voice. They want to be able to have an opportunity to ask why. They want to have an opportunity to explain the impact. And so I think just that in and of itself is not insignificant in any way. And it may also mean that punishment is still a part of what happens. But I think such an important centerpiece is really about the decision-making and that idea of repair and accountability being really connected to those who are most impacted by the harm.
Thank you. Thank you, Alana. Here's my next question from Erin. I recently did a research project on Native Americans, and this is their common way of dealing with issues. Everyone is involved and everyone gets to talk and help and make everyone whole. Victim, offender, families, communities. And this is a plug for you, Professor Sand. I chose this route project after my Zoom meeting with Professor Sand. Does anybody want to comment on the origins of restorative justice? And she's like, Erin, sorry. She's like, it's not even a question.
Alana did make a good point, which is that there are ancient roots to RJ. Yes, there's a new awareness, but a lot of the practices have indigenous roots, both to people in this country, First Nation, and around the world. Interestingly, Kay Pranis, who is a internationally recognized trainer in RJ, one of the things that she always says is every one of us had ancestors who sat in circle to resolve problems. And I personally wrestle with the issue of what is honoring versus what is appropriating indigenous practices. And so hearing Kay Pranis say, you know, it was how communities survived, was they figured out how to resolve their problems. And it is interesting to think back on each of our own origin stories. And oftentimes there are practices within family history that we wouldn't have called RJ, but very much share attributes of current restorative practices. And so I do think that this issue of honoring versus appropriating is very much a challenging issue in the field, as is how does this movement safeguard against replicating the very hierarchies and dominance that the movement is trying to avoid. And I put in a plug for Alana co-hosted a really excellent podcast series with the authors of a book called Colorizing Restorative Justice. That is a really important look at whether this movement is replicating practices it professes it wants to jettison. So I commend you all to Alana's podcast.
Alana, I just said, could you do a plug for your, like, I just sent you a message if you could, like, maybe.
You can find it on Spotify and Apple, wherever you find podcasts. It's called The Restorative Lens. And then really quick, I want to give time for Katie to kind of talk about some of the details, because I saw one question come up about sort of financial support and scholarships. But Sarah asked a question, and also one I think is so important, about avoiding pressure on victims and survivors who do not want to participate in a process like this. And the main thing I'll say is that there's so many different ways of going about what this process and application of restorative justice can look like. And I think a really important part of the program is not only learning what it is, but learning limitations of when it is not applicable. And a big part of that is giving that choice and agency, again, centering the person who's most impacted by the harm. And if this is not what they want, that there should absolutely not be pressure to make something happen. It's centering their voice and their choice in moving forward with that as an option, but not as something that should ever be mandated. And there's a lot of different sort of ways of practice to approach that. So it's kind of a broad answer, but I think it's a really important question. So thank you. And Robbie, I think I saw your hand up again, but also, I know Katie wanted to talk about, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, I like the restorative justice, and then I can always stay on the end to talk about the, apply and how scholarships and financial aid work.
Okay, I thought I saw a hand. If you have a question.
Yeah, I did. I did have my hand up. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No, I'm fascinated by the entire topic. I'm an educator, but I think I might have mentioned this to you in the email, or to the young man I spoke with, Nasser, about I've always followed words, so my master's degree is in linguistics, but when I wrote my thesis, it was on interrogation. And I was looking at the use of language within interrogation um, to lead to confessions. And so I looked at false confessions. And then for my dissertation, I looked at the literacy practices and attitudes of incarcerated young people, and just what were their words about language and how they were educated within the juvenile justice system. And so I'm very curious about discretion as I'm just listening to this conversation, what you've said, but also Professor Sands. And it seems like there's been a shift in the emphasis of who has the right to discretion, whether it's the prosecutor or whether it's the person who has been harmed. And I am wondering about how power is instantiated, shifted, and shared in a restorative justice paradigm, I guess. And I'm thinking about, regardless of what a victim says or doesn't say, right? So the victim has some discretion, right? Or the person who is harmed maybe doesn't want to use the word victim, right? But has some discretion. But then there must be other players who also have discretion to act on behalf of the one who's harmed when he or she can't really do that sensibly, or when someone who has caused the harm might be taking advantage of a lenient system or a more lenient system. And I'm just wondering about discretion in general, how it's shared and how power is instantiated in this kind of framework.
Few people give up power voluntarily, and it is a challenge in this field. The person with the most authority, power, and discretion in the criminal legal system is the prosecutor. And anyone who tells you it is a judge, let's spend some time in court. And I can pretty confidently say, I'll convince you otherwise. 90+% of cases that get filed are resolved by plea agreement. We essentially don't have jury trials anymore. That means the prosecutor is driving the bus and dictating the terms. Historically, prosecutors ran on a so-called tough on crime stance, separating themselves from whether that was actually having a positive impact on people, communities, and the crime rate and recidivism rate. We're starting to see, and here I hope I'm responding to your question a little bit, this so-called progressive prosecutor movement, where DAs are running on reform and restorative platforms, looking to create stronger communities, better relationships, less concerned about incarceration. So they're not seeking cash bail. They're developing internal conviction review procedures. They're promoting what's known as a so-called second look legislation, where judges could revisit a sentence sometime down the road, because the emotionality at the moment of sentencing jacks sentences up to these outrageous numbers that get imposed. And yet most places don't have a mechanism to say, yeah, maybe 10, 15, 20 years incarceration seemed reasonable at the time of sentencing, but now it just seems disproportionate to the behavior. So reining in, it's interesting, two of my students this semester proposed ways to prevent prosecutors from punishing defendants who exercise the right to jury trial. We say the right to jury trial is at the backbone of our democracy. It's a safeguard against tyranny. But what happens is prosecutors will make a pretrial offer, and if that's not accepted and the person gets convicted, they will ratchet up their recommendation to the court. And there are even judges now, and this just blows me away because it is so unconstitutional, but there are judges who will say to defendants, if you don't take this offer, I am going to punish you even more harshly if you go to trial. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Serial podcast, but it's the third episode follows courts in Cleveland, Ohio. And if any of you had any queasiness, qualms, or misgivings about the criminal legal system, you better sit down, because it's unbelievable what these judges do. The way they pressure people to jettison their constitutional rights, to take pleas, to move the conveyor belt of justice along. And I sometimes think that judges become like Amazon fulfillment people. And that's not what our system is supposed to be. So I've forgotten your question. Sorry, I'm getting a little passionate about this.
It was a discretion question. It was how is the power shared as far as whose discretion trumps the other person's discretion, because it's so much bigger than even a triangle. I mean, I'm assuming there's the one who's harmed, the one who caused the harm, and then there are other folks. And I'm not sure who all those other folks are, but I would think that they would have to somewhat tether and regulate one another as far as how the discretion is used in the power of deciding how the responsible party has to amend or pay for the harm.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say one last comment. It is a beautiful and messy tapestry, because we give harmed parties a voice, but our system believes that the state is a harmed party as well. And so until communities resolve their disputes on their own without state intervention, I think the state always will have a voice. Developing and electing prosecutors who are comfortable at minimizing their voice, I think, is part of this movement's effort.
Can I just add one other thing? So I think another piece of this is, and I'm guessing your question is really specific to the criminal justice system, because this looks different in schools and in other settings. But for criminal justice system, I think another important piece is looking at what sort of stage restorative justice comes into play. And so there's some really phenomenal examples of restorative justice programs working directly with law enforcement to mitigate and completely sort of just avoid going through the criminal justice process altogether. And so in terms of discretion, when it comes to, I think it depends on what stage of the process a restorative justice comes into play. So there's definitely programs like that the goal is working with like early sort of sources of prevention to avoid getting to that place altogether. And then alternatively, there's other organizations like a group called Hidden Water that works with survivors of sexual violence within families. And their work is really phenomenal, because I think it addresses this other huge issue in the justice system, especially for victims and survivors, when, you know, there comes into question this whole thing around timing. And if you don't go through the process in this window of time that you're supposed to, following the state, and in the way that they want you to, there's really no option later. And so that is another way that restorative justice can offer something that says, one, you don't always even have to involve the harm, the person who involved or inflicted harm. So that's one important piece, is that there's some completely victim survivor centered programs that the goal is supporting them and them only. And then alternatively, sometimes that discretion is fully looking at just, it doesn't matter the timeline. It doesn't matter if this was 20 years ago, that program is supporting that victim and survivor at whatever stage they come into looking for support. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's an important kind of distinction to look at what stage of the sort of justice process someone is coming into play, and there's a need really for restorative justice at a lot of those different stages of support, and there's really awesome examples of where it exists at sort of each stage.
Thank you, Alana. Eva, do you have a comment or a question?
A little of both, because I was like, oh, I'm here for like something different, but I'll put my 2 cents in. Like I've done a lot of, work around preparing JLWAP people for their parole hearings, and another piece that we haven't really mentioned is that many people that have caused harm do want to address it. Maybe not in the immediate moments, but it is really important for them to acknowledge the harm that they've caused, to hear from the survivors and the victims. And a lot of the people I work with, that's, they've had decades to sit and think about what happened. And so that it's a very healing process, like all around, it ends up, I think, becoming, especially in the juvenile system, like a program someone has to do, without it being a philosophy of healing and care and change and repair. And so, the impact on the person that has caused the harm in that process is really powerful. And sometimes they might never, like the people I work with, might not ever get to speak to the survivors, right? Like decades old murders and things like that. But they can put, they put into the universe in their parole hearings or in letters and things, their thoughts and feelings. And, where it lands, it's out there somewhere. Hopefully it went into the ears and hearts. But that process for that individual was really powerful. And so that's another component, I think, that we don't really talk about always, right? Because we talk about the process, but that piece is really powerful to witness.
We had 4 gentlemen who were incarcerated in Norfolk Prison in Massachusetts have presented a couple of times to my class, and Armand says, and others in the field say, harmed people harm people. And so part of the, and Eric, one of those groups, one of those people also said, I was a victim before I was a victimizer. So in addition to the system being a bit like Amazon conveyor belt, we're pushing trauma along without addressing it. And the process of making amends oftentimes involves acknowledging personal trauma. And so there is healing that can happen, not just for the harm party, but also for the responsible party.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sand. I am Alana, Kyla, Professor Sand. I'm going to move into more of an admission how to apply portion. But if anyone has any last minute questions for Professor Sand, Alana, or Kyla, if you want to let me know before I let them go, and then I can dig into how to join our wonderful community and apply. Any last says out there? All right. So, hey, and thank you so much, Kyla, Alana. Oh, here's one. I knew I'd get one. I'll get our final question and then I'll let you go. Dr. Sand, I appreciate that you earlier mentioned transformative justice and it's RJ. I agree that they are quite intertwined and also aware of the criticism placed on RJ from those more focused in transformative justice. I'd like to hope that those working in either field will be aware of the relationship between the two and assume, based on your brief mention of the transformation of justice, employers, organization, specifically a master's in restorative, to have others in the program express this concern. Are you seeing the question?
Yeah.
one quick thing on that, because I'm seeing some people have to go, and happy to respond to this, but maybe Katie, if you have a
I'll type it.
1 minute. Okay. So Katie, you're plugging in the application dates and things. Okay. And I will also add an email in here for myself if others want to do that as well. If you have any other questions at all, feel free to always follow up.
I think I got confused. Where are we, Alana?
Now I'm just looking back at,
and I'm sorry, I was typing for the application dates. I might as well just say it. So April 15th for residential. We have one for December 6th for spring term 1 online. Spring term 2, Veronica, when is that deadline? They're staggered. So our online, which happens every 7 weeks, those deadlines for applying are staggered. And I don't know, Veronica, if you want to put your Calendly in, and then Sarah can reach out to you and schedule an appointment.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I like to go really deep into restorative justice. So I really appreciate the time that Professor Sand and Alana have given us. Okay. So Professor Sand, Alana, do you want to hit that question, or should I move into how to apply, transformative justice, restorative justice, the balance?
What I will certainly say is that the VLS program, at least at its inception, was really system-based because we're at a law school. And a lot of, as I understand the transformative justice movement, it is trying to change historical inequities separate and apart from existing systems. I will also say that I think there are many different definitions of RJ and TJ. And so Shana, I'd be curious about what distinctions you draw, but part of what is unique about our program is we are at a law school. All of our students in the MARJ program take at least one JD course. And so it definitely is a system-based focus. I will say this semester, more than any other semester, my students are saying, what about defund? What about prison abolition? What about even more radical, transformative approaches that are not incremental, though important changes, but are fundamental changes to existing structures?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sand. Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Kyla. So if you all like, I'm gonna switch gears. So we'll go into, thank you. We're gonna go into a little bit of how to apply, and it will be pretty brief. I'm gonna share my screen here really quickly. All right. Are you guys seeing my, oh wait, you're not seeing my, hold on. Oh, I think I'm doing it wrong. Sorry. Bear with me all. There we go. All right, I'm gonna start my slideshow here. I got so caught up in the playing. So can you all see? Is it just my presenter mode?
We can see.
Okay. All right. So applying to Vermont Law School. Oh, and you can see our snow. So we're nestled in the Green Mountains. For online, a lot of our online students will come in the summer or they'll come for graduation, but this is a little bit of exactly how our campus looks right now. See, sorry, their closed captioning is making it, it's on top of my, move my slides over. So bear with me. Aha. Important resources for information. Call us. Well, our website, Apply Now, the admissions website. Ask an admissions counselor. We've got Veronica on the line. We've got Nasser. We've got myself. I'm usually a little slower than Nasser and Veronica. I'll say that. So please contact us. If you are applying through law school, if you're like doing a JD and a master's, you would apply through LSAC, but most of our master's as students, well, they all apply through us directly. It's really an easy, it's an easy application process. So you apply via vermontlaw.edu, and then there's literally a button that says apply now. Here's my dates that are, didn't change, but you can kind of have an idea. So April 15th for residential, and then spring term 1 is December 6th. So I know that's coming up fast, but if you get your application in, we can turn it around. And Veronica, I didn't say this, but we can kind of like go with, like, we can make exceptions on certain things. So Nasser, that you didn't hear that from me, but so that's for this upcoming for spring term 1, and then spring term 2 sometime in February, and then it goes through like if you're doing fall, it would be the end of August for online, or mid-August. So this just gives you an idea of our campus before the snow. Okay, required materials. The application form, which is very easy to fill out. You do have to attach your resume, your personal statement, your transcripts will come, you'll order them, and they usually come to us either via online or they'll come via the old-fashioned way in the mail. You'll also type in your recommenders during the application process. So you'll type them in, and then we automatically send them an email. So that way they know how to get the letter of recommendation in. I am going to talk a little bit about kind of the pieces. So your resume is a fluid document. Depending on where you are in your life, most resumes are a page if you're a little younger. Mine's about 2 pages. I'm a little bit older. Robbie, I know you've published and you have such an expansive thing, so I would suspect yours is like a lot longer. But oh, you've got it only to 2 pages. I am impressed. So that's actually ideal. And your resume it's professional. It's a professional school, and we look for professional resumes. The personal statement, why you want to do this program. It's usually 2 pages, double spaced, and an insight to who you are, why you want to go to Vermont Law, why you want to pursue restorative justice, and a kind of maybe like something you could bring to our community: leadership, tenacity. I know, Robbie, you're right on my screen, so I'm looking at you, like your wisdom from your past curricular experience, from your experience in schools. So a little bit of that. I like to get to know you. Your personal statement is really where you shine. We have an optional essay, how you've created change. That could be a paragraph, that could be a page. This is my favorite because it's my opportunity to kind of see something that you might, if you're applying to other grad programs, that they might not know. It can be, had one change essay where the applicant told me that they quit swimming in college their senior year, and then they had to go through a process of discovering who they were because they had always been the person who swam. I had one person who gave me a little change essay on, they were promoted at their office and they gave a what they did to be more effective in their new job, which you should see my desk. It's like a mess. Nasser can attribute to this because he walks by it every day. I loved it. I loved it so much. I called and I said, hey, if the master's program doesn't work out, I think you should write self-help books. It was perfect. The academic appraisal. This really is if there's something in your transcript that you want to tell me about. There's a bad semester, or, there's a couple of, if you took organic chemistry or statistics or calculus and you have that poor grade, and it could be just one line. Character and fitness information. This is maybe, maybe you have some contact with a court and you just need to disclose that. And it's really simple. We are a restorative justice school. So maybe the date that it happened, a little bit of the charges and the results. We're not judging. It's definitely not a school where we judge, but it's important to disclose that because sometimes in this field, you'll go into careers that require that, and then they look at your application. 2 letters of recommendation. For those of you still in school, we prefer a faculty. Letters of recommendation, someone who really knows you, I would give them time, let them know you're applying so that they can be prepared. And then if you're in the workforce, it could be a supervisor or someone who you've worked on projects with. The LSAT score is for JD applicants. So if we have any people looking at law school, you need to take the dreaded LSAT. And if you're international, we do require transcript evaluations and a TOEFL. But if you've taken courses in English, then we can look at waiving that. Let's see. Oh, look, Veronica has the dates on there. But I don't know if anyone has any application questions. For master students, I look at your grades, look at your transcripts. It's my favorite thing to do. A lot of my colleagues love personal statements, and I like them, but I really love the transcript because I feel like I'm going through your journey, and it's amazing what you see in a transcript because you can see where you were trying something out, and then you tried this. You can see what you liked, what you didn't necessarily liked. They tell a lot, so that's kind of one of my favorite little pieces of the application. And then I love getting to know you, but also I feel like we know a lot of you because you contact us. So if you're interested in knowing us and getting to know us, we're happy to talk with you. It's like, I know Andrew's gave us a shout out earlier. So I like that. I always feel like we know students before they come to campus, or before, if you're doing the program online, it's a community. The online community is such a community. And I love it because every graduation, I organize photos and everybody comes in. We do graduation in May. It's mid-May. And our residential folks are here, our online folks are here, and they all come. And then our online folks were like, oh, we hope you feel at home. They have a community. They've all rented a house together. They take their picture. They're off and running. So it's really nice to see. One thing, I got to backtrack, Eva, scholarships. So if you're residential, if you're applying for a residential program, I do merit awards for our residential program. And that's issued automatically. For online, we have limited scholarships available, which usually go through Veronica, who's on this call. And it's generally because students are working while going through the program. So that's how that works. Seeing that you both love what, I know. I got to tell you, for accreditation, I require all transcripts. So I know there's some old ones out there. And that's one thing, is if you can get them ordered. If you're looking and there's a time constraint, just talk to Veronica and we can try and make something happen in lieu of. But we just need them all on file eventually. And Veronica, you know, I can't believe yeah, I can't believe this is recorded.
I do want to mention that even though Katie really likes to look at transcripts, yes, some of you have been out of school for a while. And so you have a robust career or been doing a lot of things since then. And of course, we look at that very closely as well. So it's not just about the transcripts. It just happens to be a piece of the equation. So yeah, we look at the entire application, all pieces.
Yeah, and it is true. I do look at non-traditional students in a different light. I look at your career. Because I look at my transcripts, sometimes I'm like, ooh, and it's like they have to go to the basement to get it. They tell me that when I call.
Yeah, don't worry, Sarah, you'll be fine, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have to say, when students are applying to our programs, they have such varied, wonderful, extraordinary careers, backgrounds, education, experiences, that I want to be them before they even come to school. It's the people that apply to Vermont law are very different than traditional law schools or any traditional program out there. I don't know. They have this big heart and mission and dream of creating change and going back to their communities. Oh, Kyla's leaving. She's going to probably go study. Yeah, and I was like, so I don't know if there's, let me stop my poor sharing skills. I don't know if there's any other questions. I appreciate you all coming tonight. And thank you, Veronica and Nasser, for joining us. I really appreciate that. All right. Well, wonderful.
Hey, Katie.
Yeah.
So I was just asked a question independently, and pardon me, I don't have the answer to it, so I figured I would ask. If one was to submit a website instead of a CV to show what they're working on, have anyone done that? Has done that in the past? And
no,
what is law school?
I think so no. So what I would do is I would probably put, the work on your CV, like the work of what you're doing. You could put the hyperlink in there. But I think for the most part, sometimes I'll go, but for the most part, I don't. So it might be a little addendum that you add. That's an interesting, that would be a good addendum. I created this website. Here it is. This is a little bit about it. If it's like a paragraph, so then they'll read it. And then if the reader is interested, they'll pop over. But I would maybe do one line in your resume and then have a little addendum, because I believe that's it's an interesting piece of who you are. Kind of, it almost can fall into the how you've created change. You've created this website kind of thing. So I think that's good. And sometimes I'll click over, and honestly, it depends on how busy a reader is in the application process. Now we're very interested. You should pop your website link in the chat. Yeah.
So I was wondering if that website, references more like maybe a biography of kind of what they're working on versus a website that they created. So that's the part I wasn't quite sure of.
Yeah, I think
that would be, I do look up people, I'll be like, oh, let's Google this person. And you can get sometimes some interesting background of what they're doing for work, their background. So that sometimes is helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I will say, I'm going to do a little segue for masters. I think that's terrific. If you're applying for a JD program, they're a little less touchy-feely than a master's program, even nationally. So I would just make sure that you do an addendum and really say, hey, I'm really proud of this website. This is a little bit of what I've done, but I would keep it to a page or less. And if it sparks their interest, they'll go. Yeah, but I would kind of create that spark and then they'll head that way. Any other questions?
Thank you all. I'm glad you were able to join. There's a few names I know I've had some emails going back and forth with this week. So I'm glad you're able to come.
Alana, and thank you. This was fun. Alana is in the program too. Can I say that? Alana's doing the MARJ. So yeah, and it's really fun to watch you grow through the program, because I can see it. I can see you developing. I know that's kind of personal, but I just wanted to say amazing work.
Yeah, it's an awesome benefit of being an employee here. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you take these classes?
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all. I'm going to sign off, but thank you so much.
Have a good